Hey up! I thought I'd use some stock footage for a change. I'd pay for it but never use it. I couldn't help wondering how he managed to put that bike into gear with the back brake. I shall have to try it out. My motorcycle journey has lasted over 40 years now, and just as I started this channel up, I'd sort of reached that final destination, something that I've been looking for all my life, but it had always eluded me. But even when I finally found it about 7 years ago, I don't think it really clicked with me exactly what it was that I'd actually found or achieved. Don't get me wrong, I've had some great bikes over the years, but I always ended up feeling like there was something missing. When I finally made the move to a modern classic motorcycle, suddenly everything felt more complete. Feeling that something was missing had gone. I'd wanted a Royal Enfield Bullet or Classic for decades, but I'd never quite had the courage to buy one because, you know, of the perceived reputation. And I'd almost bought a Triumph Bonneville a couple of times, but then, you know, I finally did it. I finally jumped in with both feet. And for the first time ever in my motorcycling career, I felt like I'd hit that sweet spot. I was in that perfect zone. But even then, I was a bit confused as to why I was in that sweet spot. You know, I couldn't quite quantify what was so right about it. And I've come to the realisation in the last year or so that what it actually is versatility. Modern classic motorcycles are the most versatile motorcycles on the planet. They can do just about anything and everything that any other class or genre of motorcycle can do, and they do it well. And something that I think is often overlooked, one of the reasons for them being so versatile, is social acceptance. And now I've said that, I suppose I'm going to have to try and explain it. Because I think, actually, of all the other aspects of modern classic motorcycles, it's social acceptance that is the main reason for their flexibility and versatility in any situation. If you ask any non-motorcyclist to draw a picture of a motorcycle, what they'll come up with is a sort of stylised version of a bike built somewhere between, let's say, 1945 and about 1980. Because that psychological picture that everyone has in the brains of a motorcycle is that traditional blueprint of a bike. For the most part, it's unlikely that they'll draw a motocross bike or an adventure tourer or even just a modern sports bike. It'll be a simple drawing comprising of two wheels, one at each end, connected by a frame, with an engine in the middle, a curved fuel tank, some sort of seat and a pair of handlebars. And undoubtedly a proper pair of mudguards. A classically styled motorcycle. Now, I'm not trying to say that between sort of the 1940s and the early 1980s motorcycles didn't change. They did change, but the general formula remained the same. And the human memory is imperfect. Like a lot of people from the early 1980s when I first started riding, I progressed through ownership of all the latest and greatest modern, most up-to-date motorcycles, because the evolution of the motorcycle went off at a different direction from the early 1980s. It may have started in the late 70s, but, you know, I'm generalising. And I'll go into the reasons for that in a few minutes. But throughout those years of chasing the latest, greatest technology, I always found that where non-motorcyclists were concerned, there was always a bit of a stigma attached to bikes. I mean, motorcycling has never had a great reputation, which doesn't help. But rolling up at any destination on a big, powerful speed machine was never met with approval from passers-by. There was always a feeling that you were being judged immediately. The thing with a modern classic is that, in the mind's eye of non-motorcyclists, it provokes a different emotion, a more positive emotion. They all had a relative, an uncle, grandfather, father, whatever, that had a bike that to them looked just like the one that you're riding. And that was a big eye-opener to me when I got the first Bonneville, because rather than being looked upon with disdain, instantly people have a positive emotion towards you and your bike, which provokes a response that I'd never encountered before as a motorcyclist, one of friendliness and interest. I mean, I'm sure there must have been times, but in the previous 30-something years of motorcycling, I don't ever really remember positive encounters with passers-by when I arrive at a destination. But over the last 7 years, there's literally been hundreds of them. In fact, I often joke on this channel that, you know, when you're riding a modern classic, just the simple act of perhaps going to the shops, you need to factor in an extra 20 minutes to chat with and answer the questions of whoever is waiting at your bike when you return to it. Because most often I've found seeing you and your modern classic motorcycle evokes an emotion linked to happier times for them, you know, perhaps an ex-partner, a father, a grandfather, as I've said, or an uncle. They automatically put you into a category of friendliness. They don't perceive you as just another biker. They immediately classify you as an approachable, friendly person. Now, I know to a lot of people that probably won't seem to be a very important thing, but speaking as somebody who, especially during the 1980s, was often refused entry into certain establishments, you know, pubs for a meal or maybe a restaurant or cafe, because I was a biker and bikers weren't allowed, that's worth its weight in gold. Riding a modern classic definitely opens up a lot of doors. Now, the other thing about riding a modern classic which shouldn't be underestimated is the dress code, because there isn't one. Now, I know some people like dressing up as a motorcyclist, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's one of the gripes I always had about riding a bike was that, you know, when you got to your destination, you had these heavy boots on, armoured trousers, an armoured jacket, a heavy full-faced helmet, and it was a pain in the arse getting around. Great while you were riding the bike, but not so great when you got off the bike. And the thing about a modern classic is, you know, they're styled on bikes that were built in an era where they were just transport and people travelled on them wearing normal clothes. Obviously, I love motorcycles, but I also like to dress like a human being, and no other class of motorcycle gives you the freedom to be able to do that. You know, I live on a main road and I often watch people going to work on the bikes in the morning, and, you know, they dress like your regular leather-clad motorcyclist. Now, I don't actually know what it is they do for a living, apart from the fact that they're obviously going to work, but I often wonder if they have to have a complete different set of clothes when they get to work. There's no need for any of that with a modern classic. Right, so let's get down to the nuts and bolts of what makes a modern classic so practical and versatile. Now, I think the big changes sort of commenced in the 1970s. From the 40s until the late 1970s, the general structure of a motorcycle, the general makeup of a bike had remained the same. And there's a good reason for that. It's because that configuration of your archetypal motorcycle works best in most eventualities. But by the early 1980s, most people, including young people, were aspiring to motorcars, and the popularity of motorcycles had gone through the floor. They were dying out. Now, I understand why it happened. Motorcycle manufacturers basically had to reinvent the motorcycle to try and get sales back up. And they started to move away from the solid all-rounder design to more specialist models to attract different groups of people. The race replica or sports bike, which later became the sports tourer, the all-out touring machine, the adventure tourer, The factory custom, these types of bikes all went off at different directions and became more specialised. And although arguably that probably saved motorcycling back in the 1980s, it sort of eroded the general purpose practicality of the humble traditional motorcycle. In a way, motorcycles became single-purpose machines that did one thing really well, but wasn't so accomplished at other things. The obsession with speed and power meant that these bikes became bigger and heavier. The magic weight distribution was lost. Not particularly convenient in most aspects of a motorcyclist's daily life. I mean, I remember one of the turning points for me was with my BMW GSA 1200. A fantastic bike, long-legged and powerful. But quite often, if I wanted to use it just to do local errands, going to the shops, that kind of thing, I would often find it just too much hassle dragging it out of the garage and going on it. With a full fuel tank, it was top heavy, it was ungainly, and quite often I would elect just to walk to the shops. It was too much trouble. Now, by contrast, people often complain to me about the weight of modern classics because, yeah, they're not lightweight bikes, but this magic formula that the early manufacturers had put together for the design of a traditional motorcycle meant that the weight was distributed properly. The centre of gravity is low, so although on paper a classic 500 might not seem to be that much lighter than a GSA, the reality is that it's actually a very different motorcycle to manhandle. It's not about how heavy the bike is, it's about where that weight is on the bike. A tried and trusted formula that modern classic bikes inherently have, that a lot of other modern motorcycle manufacturers seem to have forgotten about. And that always was and still is the key to their versatility. Stick the right luggage on them and the perfect tourers, with more than enough performance to get you to where you need to go in a reasonable time. Take the luggage off and it's the perfect, convenient commuter. Economical and perfect for the job. It's the perfect bike for a Sunday afternoon run to the coast. And then slap the luggage back on and it's the perfect bike for the 10-mile run to the supermarket to get a week's shopping. And if speed is your thing, any of these bikes on the right road, because of their inherent handling properties, have more than enough performance to thrill. They are the perfect all-rounder. And surprisingly, even the most unlikely modern classic motorcycle can be surprisingly good off-road. The old motorcycle manufacturers knew exactly what they were doing. They were continuing to use a tried and trusted formula that worked in just about every eventuality. They were a complete all-purpose machine, and as much as a modern all-singing, all-dancing motorcycle might seem like the logical choice for a more complete motorcycling experience, actually a lot has been lost. A modern motorcyclist's requirements are still pretty much the same as they were 60 years ago. And I've found on this 40-something year journey through motorcycling that the most complete, versatile motorcycling experience can only be achieved with a traditional motorcycle design that can be found in most modern classic motorcycles. That's why they've become so popular over the last 10 years. Right, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. It does help to stimulate the algorithm, which gives my videos a further reach and helps the channel to progress. You can support me in other ways if you wish to, by my Patreon page or through the super thanks button down below. Either way, your support is much appreciated. I am of course going to be back next week, so until then, please, ride safely, and I'll see you soon.